Okay, hello everyone. Thank you all for coming. This is Software Saturdays, Lesson 2, JavaScript. So before we begin, were there any questions last week from anybody about, HTML, JavaScript, anything like that? You can put in the chat or speak them out loud. It's up to you guys. But I'm not seeing any at the moment, so we're going to say that no one has any questions at the time. That's okay. All right, so as a quick review for this semester, I'll give it every week. The first 5 weeks will be learning lessons, and the last 2 weeks will be project days. You can see the lessons and their associated project days here. We are in week 2, JavaScript. We have basic VueJS next week with an intermediate the week after that. Finishing off the unit with NoSQL databases. Cool. And as a reminder, if you need some help at any time, you can see all of the help we offer here. So there's these weekly sessions every Saturday at 3:30. There are the recorded learnings, which I'll probably post probably tomorrow when I edit the videos finally, and weekly open review hours every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. To access those, the links will be posted in the Slack channel probably about the couple hours beforehand. I'll put a reminder out a couple hours beforehand as well, so you guys can just come in as you go, as you please. I highly recommend you take advantage of this as we move into like the more advanced Vue and then JavaScript stuff, because it can get kind of complicated pretty fast. And then finally, Slack channels. We offer help every day on our Slack channels. Post a question in the spring 2021 VueJS channels, and somebody will make sure to answer that question as soon as possible. Check out my recordings here, make sure they're still working. Yes, they are. Very nice. Cool, and before we begin, everyone should have already had this open, but please open up your text editor you were using before. I recommend VS Code if you want a nice one that I like to use for my personal coding purposes, link down there. But you can use whatever works for you. For example, Atom, Notepad++, whatever you want to use. And as always, the demo files and examples that you talk about in class today are all on GitHub. So before we do that, I want to jump into the GitHub really quick. So you can see here in the master branch, if you're familiar with the Git branches at all, are going to be all the demo programs for this particular week. If you wanted to access programs for example, lesson 1 or in the future lesson 2, you would go to the little drop-down menu at the top here, like right above where my name is going to be. Click the drop-down and you can change for the branches tab which lesson number you want. So I'll make sure that every lesson will be updated the week after. So for example, lesson 2 will be here probably next Wednesday, and then lesson 3 and so on and so on. So if you ever need any help with that, or want to look back and do the recordings, that's where you can find them. Perfect. Now let's move on to JavaScript. So this lesson is all about JavaScript, and we're going to talk a lot about JavaScript, as the name might suggest. Try that again. Nope, doesn't want to work. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is, according to like a definition you could say, is a high-level programming language used to create dynamic web pages. And JavaScript is oftentimes used in an HTML page, but in a few cases it can be used outside of HTML. Finally, if you're familiar with C or Python, JavaScript has a lot of similarities to these two languages. So even if you don't know them, however, we will teach you everything you need to know in this class. And of course, if you still need some help, office hours are a great resource. So let's start with some basic JavaScript syntax. Now, a few of these are going to look a little similar, a few of them will look a little bit different, but we'll go through all of them through our numerous examples today during class. The first one is var and let. So in JavaScript, if you like to define a new basic variable, you're going to use the keywords var or let. This is different from like say C or Java or equivalent kind of what's called strongly typed language, where variables have to be a certain type. Whereas in JavaScript, each variable can be any kind of data type it wants. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it, that's okay. All you have to know is to define a variable in this programming language. Use the keyword let or var. We'll do an example of that in our demo program. This is similar to Python in that if you define a variable, it can take on any type you want, and it can be reassigned type later on as well. Next main keyword you should probably be aware of is the function keyword. And again, we'll cover this in demo, I believe it's 3 or 2. This defines the start of a function. These functions act just like they would in Python or in C. However, the main difference here being, unlike in Python, unlike in C, my bad, you do not need a return type in your function header there. Yuzhao asks, how to join the Slack? Well, if you go to the slide, the link on slide 1, the softwarestudies.slack.com, go down to the bottom. There should be like a join now button, I believe is the actual wording. I could be wrong about that. But click on the join now, create an account, something of that sort, and it'll help you walk through the process of making an account with your Purdue email. If you still can't get it working, let me know. We can give you guys an invite link that will work for you. And the final keyword is document, which refers to the HTML web page. We're not going to use document too much. We'll briefly go over it because a lot of times you may still see it in some older code, but a lot of more modern applications do not really use a document keyword, which is technically a variable that refers to the HTML web page. Are there any questions so far? All right, that's fine. Some more basic JavaScript syntax. If else, just like you would see in C, and they act just like they would in C in Python. For and while, once again, act just like they would in C, and act just like they would in C in Python. If you're coming from a Python background, a for loop might look a little bit different than what you're familiar with, but that's no problem. You'll catch up on the C-style for loop pretty quickly. And if you're coming from like a C background or a Java background or a similar language, then all this will seem very natural to you. And then some quick math stuff. Again, we're going to go into a lot of the more basic stuff and go to a big demo program that'll show you all of these kind of things using an actual program. So some basic JavaScript math operators. You have plus, minus, star, divide, modulus, and exponents. Again, very similar to Python in this regard. One thing to note here is that division is going to be floating point division, if you know what that means. And then finally, some comparison operators. You got, your standard comparison operators: less than or greater, equal to, greater than or equal to, not equal to. But the two new ones you might not have seen before that are very unique to JavaScript are strict equal to and strict not equal to. So what does this mean? Well, strict equal to is going to be, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but basically it has a typecasting. I'd have a whole slide about that in a couple slides from now, but all you have to know is that it's a very, very difficult thing to be keeping track of, and unless you have a reason not to, please always use strict equal to or strict not equal to, and you'll see why in a couple slides. Okay, now that's all the basic JavaScript out of the way. Again, we'll go through all of it in demo program 1 in about a slide, I want to say. How do we actually add a JavaScript file to HTML? Now I'm going to briefly go over this slide here. I'll go over the actual thing in like the actual demo program, but you use a script tag. So you might have seen this if you did some kind of extra reading last week on HTML, but script tags allow you to have JavaScript natively in your web page. So there's two ways to do script tags. We're going to cover the first way, or the second way, which is using src HTML property, where you pass src equals, and then in quotes, the name or the location of your JavaScript source file. It does not need to be named script.js. As long as it's named .js, you are okay. The file name does not matter here. Are there any questions before we go to a demo program? Okay, I don't see any. That's all right. So time to jump into demo program 1. Okay, so demo program 1 is on the GitHub, and I'm just open up these files here for you. So the CSS file is pretty bare bones. It's got some font stuff going on to make it look nicer for us. And the demo1.html page looks pretty basic. So if you want to recall back to last week, that head tag we mentioned last time, I did say that the only things you would have to be concerned about would be the title and this link for CSS. That's still the same. If anything comes before, in this case, like these two lines, don't worry about them. We will always provide them to you. But these are more like, again, these are just for your browser. They have nothing to do with the actual code. So as you can see, I got a really basic HTML page. I got a couple H1, H2s, a little P tag going on over here, and then here's that script tag I was talking about. So the way you would add JavaScript to your HTML page is by doing script src equals, and then in quotes the name of the file .js, and then a closing script tag. Now, how do we actually write JavaScript? So here's a really long file that I wrote. You don't have to go through all this line by line, but I did comment it in case you were wondering. So these first two lines talk about how to define variables. So we can see we have a var test equals 10. So we're setting the variable var test equal to the value of the integer 10. And on this line 5 here, we have a let test equal to the string In JavaScript, you can intermix single and double quotes. I use double quotes because I come from like a Java C background, but you can use single quotes as like apostrophes like this, if that's okay if you feel more comfortable using that instead. Now, here is where that type thing I was talking about coming into play before. If you're coming from like a C background, like I mentioned, this may seem kind of weird to you, because you're not saying this isn't like, for example, a string or a char array, and this isn't an integer. Don't worry about that. In JavaScript, every variable can be any type. So we can just say var test and let test. And again, the name of this variable does not have to be var test or let test. It can be whatever you may want it to be. So I could name this, I don't know, blah 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 if I wanted to. And it will still be a valid JavaScript variable, as long as it is, a single word, no spaces, and it cannot start with a number. Other than that, anything goes. Now, these next two lines show you how to do print statements. So printing is a very important thing in any programming language. So just like in Java, C, Python, you name it, you can print stuff to the screen using console.log. So console.log is kind of like a print or like a printf or a system.out.print line. And then you put what you want to print in the parentheses next to the console.log. So here I'm printing out the value of var test. I'm printing out the value of let test on the line next to it. But you can also put like a string or a number or whatever you want here. So again, not super important. Then we'll divide our line there. Now I will show you how to access this print terminal, because by default your web browser will hide the console from you because most people don't need to actually see it in their day-to-day lives. So again, let's open this file up. So again, to open it up, you're going to go to whatever folder you save your files to. I call mine Programming Web Projects. And then open up the HTML file. Double click and it should open up in your browser, just like that. Cool. Oh, a little lag there. Now I do want to go through this file first before we jump into the actual how to see the print lines. So there right now. So I have some basic operators here. Let's just show you the relational operators and their strictness. So for example, you got 5 less than 6. That will print true because 5 is less than 6. You got 5 less than or equal to 5, which is going to also be true. -2 greater than -10. That is also true. 4 greater than or equal to 7. That will be false. 10 equal 3. That will be false because 10 is not equal to 3. But you don't only have to compare numbers. You can compare strings as well. So I have hello world not equal to lowercase hello world. That'll be false because these two, that'd be true. My bad, it'd be true because these two are not equal. And then finally, a bit about strictness. So like I said, strictness has to do with what's called typecasting. So by default, JavaScript, if it can, will try to convert the types of the variables to make them match. which again may be kind of confusing if you're not familiar with what types are, but just know this. If you have the number 1 and the string 1, right, so the quotes on the string here, and you set them double equal sign, this will be evaluated to true, which makes sense to us, right, as humans, because 1 equals 1, but to a computer, this should not really be true, because the number 1 is way different than the string 1. However, because JavaScript will try to convert the types to make the types equal before comparing, this is evaluated to true. On the same line, on line 22 here, if I have the 1 and the same 1, but then a bunch of not equals, you'll see that the 1 now this will become false because it will not change the types, and the number 1 is now different than the string 1. Does that make sense a little bit? I think it does. Cool. And then the same thing here for the not equal to's. But I'm going to change that just to 2 here so it will actually evaluate properly. My bad. Again, this 2 not equal to 2 should evaluate to true, because even though, again, while the number 1 and the string 2 don't look even or aren't equal to us humans, to a computer, these are stored differently. But JavaScript will turn this number 1 into the string 1 and then compare them. Whereas in line 24, it will not do the conversion, and therefore the number 1 stays the number 1, and that is not equal to the string number 2. And then the divider line here, Kathleen asks, for strictly equals to with characters, does it compare the integer with the character's ASCII value? No, what it will actually do is compare the values. So a number and a string cannot really be equal. And that's what it's going to really do. Will it compare the ASCII value? I'm not sure about that. You can try it out. I believe that it might, only for single character strings, but that method will probably fail for like a multi-character string because it'll be multiple ASCII values compared to a single number of a number. If that made no sense to you, don't worry about it too much. Just know that numbers and strings should not really evaluate the same if you use strict equals to. Okay, 1 second here, I'll check my recording, still recording. It is, very nice. This was some basic math in JavaScript. So I have a variable, let math test, again, the name can be whatever you want, equal to 0. And then I have a whole bunch of math here. So the way you would assign a variable, because I didn't talk about it before, is just the variable name equal, and then the value you want it to assign to. In that case, I'm assigning it to the value of 5 plus 45, which will be 50. And if you want to use it, just say, example equals the name of the variable and then whatever else you want to do to it. So I have an example of every math operator. Plus is addition. This hyphen is a little minus subtraction. Star is, what do you call it here? Multiplication. Divide / is division. I'm going to skip that one. Then star is exponentiation. So it'll do the value of math test to the power of 3. The last thing you want to look at here is this little divide symbol here, this little percent sign. If that's called the modulus operator, and it does the remainder of. So as I give you a brief example, the remainder of 7 divided by 5 is 2, because 5 only goes in 7 once equally, and there's 2 left over. And so the value of 7 mod 5, it's called, is going to be 2. It is the remainder of whatever your division is going to be. Does anyone want to take a stab and do the math here? Between line 29, where we say math test is 0, and line 36, where we print out the value of math test, what will it be? Zachary says 27. That sounds right. I don't remember exactly, but I'll take your word for it. So that's how you do every math operator in JavaScript and how you can use them all. The one that trips people up the most, if they're not familiar with it, is mod. You may not use mod too much beginning on, but you definitely will see many use cases for it as you go forward in your programming career. Mod 2 and mod 10 are great examples of things you will use quite often. All right, Then time for this last little bit here, if statements. Oh. What is the difference between let and var again? Yeah, so we'll cover the difference between the two of them right after this demo program, but just know that I'll explain why in a second. Always use a let. Try to avoid using var, and we will go over that after this demo program. Great question. Just know we use let. I'll talk about why in slide, whatever number that is. I think it's whatever it is, yeah. Okay, so here's a basic if statement. If else is the technical terminology here in JavaScript. Again, looks very similar to C or JavaScript, or not JavaScript, C or Java. Very same format here. You got your if, then some Boolean expression. So if math test equal var test, which should be false, it'll just print out the word print out false. And then here they demonstrate a basic while loop. So you have let I equals 0, while I less than 4, console.log I, then add 1. What this will do is it'll check is I less than 4. If that is true, which in this case it is because I is 0, it'll print out the value of I. It'll then add 1 to I and do the whole thing all over again. So while I less than 4, print add 1. While before, int add 1. Less than 4, print add 1. Once I becomes greater than or equal to 4, it will stop running this code and jump to the end, which is going to be as empty because there's nothing left from this file here. I hope that was a good demonstration of all the basic stuff we talked about. This can also be turned into a for loop if you want to have that challenge. It's a pretty basic for loop. It's literally going to look like this. So it'll be for, we'll call it I. Again, we already have it defined. I equals 0, I less than 4, I plus plus. Oh, too many pluses there. Console.log I. So as you can see, very C-like syntax. This again will print out the exact same thing as above, but in a different format. I highly recommend if you're new to programming, because it's the wrong way, sorry. Try to figure out the difference between the two of them. This example is a pretty bad one, so I wouldn't use it to figure it out, but there are many good resources available. Also, for some programming things, in case I didn't mention it explicitly, make sure every line ends with a semicolon, like in C. And if you are doing like a bracket notation, it should be more similar to Java style brackets, where the opening curly brace goes on the same line as the statement. You can see if open curly, while open curly bracket. If you come from like a C background, you may want to put it on like a new line like I did on a new line like that, like I did before. That's technically correct. It'll still work, but standard is to keep it on the same line, like in Java. However, like I said, doesn't make a difference. Do what makes you comfortable. All right, let me refresh this page. Here's our basic demonstration of our code here. Now, as you can see, nothing's printing out. That's because, like I said, your browser hides the console from you by default normally. The way to access it depends on your browser. On Firefox, with the browser that I use, it is F12 on your keyboard. I'll press F12, but wrong screen here. It also can be every browser this way. Right-click anywhere on the page, right-click, the little menu pops up, and go to Inspect Element. So Chrome, I don't know exactly what Chrome's hotkey for it is, but I know on Firefox it's going to be F12. But for every browser, a right-click Inspect Element will always work. So then once you're in here, this is a little too big, let me shrink this down a little bit. F12 on Chrome. Thank you, AJ. Yeah, it's also F12 looks like on Chrome. So like I said, F12 will kind of pop up your console. Now, go to the insert in your developer tools panel, which is a unique thing. Yours might be attached to your actual web browser. I'll dock it to the right here. This is what you'll probably see in most web browsers. It'll be docked to the right. I pop mine off, but that's again your personal preference. Go to the console tab, which should be right there in the very top, called console, and you will see the printed output. Let me actually undock it because it's a little bit easier to see. The output of everything we just wrote. So we have the 10, the the little dash line, the true, 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 the false, 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 the true. And here's the strictness, and you can see the strictness down there, and you have What am I going to say here? The divider line. Here's a math I'm talking about, 27. Thank you, Zachary. Good answer. The divider line again. And here is the false for the if statement, because the if statement was false. We have the 0 through 3 for the while loop, and the 0 through 3 for the for loop. And one cool thing about most web browsers is they'll tell you on the far right of the line where it prints it out what code triggered that line. So you can use it to kind of trace what your code is doing in the background. So here I have demo code, line 8 character, I mean it's column 9. Then here demo.1.js, line 44, column 13. So you click on it, it'll pop it up and it'll open it up for us. Does that kind of give us a good overview of the basics of JavaScript? All right, very good. So I'm going to hop back over to my slide deck here and check our recordings. That is still recording. Still recording. Perfect. Yes, we're trying to add a new recording setup, guys. Let me know how it goes. It should be a little bit easier from my end, but we'll see how it works on your end. All right, so as I believe someone mentioned, I think it was Hojung, I could be mispronouncing that name, I'm so sorry about that. When should you use let versus var? Well, never ever ever use var. It's what the short advice comes down to. Let is a newer keyword. Var is like from the old JavaScript, but let has safety precautions and protections that prevent code from being bugged out from using var. Some of these little protections include, the main one's called hoisting, or hoisting, where your code will hoist or kind of move your variable from wherever it is in your code to the very top of your code, meaning you can, in some cases, use a variable declared with var before you define it, which is a little bit buggy and will break some code. And so to prevent that from happening, let will not let you do that properly. And from now on, I also, in all my code, will always use let. I recommend you always use let as well. However, some really old or kind of like less good JavaScript tutorials will use var. Just change the word var to let and the code will work fine. It'll save you a lot of hassle because a lot of people have code bugs that come from using var that could be avoided by using let. And next is types of equality. So I kind of briefly mentioned this. To avoid hoisting with let, do we need to use? Sorry, the question was from Elijah. To avoid hoisting with let, do you need to use strict mode? No. By default, let will automatically avoid hoisting, which is one of the biggest bugs. There are a few more that I can't remember exactly on the top of my head right now, but the main one is in hoisting. If you use let, JavaScript will automatically forbid hoisting from occurring, but to be safe, you could just use strict or enable strict mode as well. We won't go over that into this course, but just remember, use let and it'll prevent most of your problems from occurring. Types of equality, as you can see here, we briefly went over this already, but again, using double equals allows JavaScript to convert the type before it'll compare, and triple equals will not allow it to convert before comparing. And if you kind of want to learn more, I have a link here to an excellent article, this little dory.github.io page, where it kind of gives you a table of how kind of compare different things might cause unintended results if you use the non-strict or double equals version of equal to. I should also note that the double versus triple equals is unique to JavaScript. It is not present in other major languages. So then here's the examples here. I kind of already had these examples to you. But for example, the string 1 and the number 1, if you use a double equals, will become true. But if you use a triple equals, the number 1 and the string 1 will not be true. In comparison, for a similar example, the number 1 double equal the Boolean true will give you true, whereas the number 1 Boolean equal the keyword true actually gives you false, because the number and a Boolean are not the same thing. All right, JavaScript functions. So again, these JavaScript functions act very similar as they do in C. The one major difference being you do not need to declare a return type if you're familiar with C or Java, but really functions can have parameters and return values. Parameters can change the results of a function, and return values can return data from the function. These are used everywhere in programming, and we'll probably be writing more than one of these for both next week and week 4, as well as for your final project. All right, demo program 2. Excuse me. Demo 2 is all about functions, so I know it's a new topic for some people. I'm not going to go to the HTML and CSS again. It's the same as it was for slide demo 1, just change the demo 2 to the demo 1. Other than that, it looks the exact same. So here are an example of some functions. So my first function here is an example with no return and no parameters. So I called mine function, no return, open parenthesis, close parenthesis. Here's a format you have to use. The name of your function can be whatever you want. I have 3 different names here. But you have to have the keyword function, the space, the parentheses, and then the opening and closing curly braces. That is required. But as you can see, the stuff between the parentheses is not needed. So this function will just print something out, blah, blah, blah. And then here is a function with a return value. So see the keyword return, and then what we're the string returning, this function had a return value. But you will notice the function header, or the definition, looks the exact same. Function, space, no params, because there are no parameters, parentheses, open curly brace. Unlike C, there is no return type. That is not required or even used in JavaScript. And then finally, on number 3, you can also have functions with parameters and return types. So this one altogether takes param1 and param2. You can have as many params as you want, between 0 and infinity technically, and you can name them whatever you want. I called mine here param1, param2, but you can call yours whatever you may want. So for example, you can call this one data1 or data, or you can call it, I don't know, Purdue, or call it, again, any variable name. The limitations are, it has to be one word and it cannot begin with a number. Let me just go back a little bit here, make sure the function works properly. And then our return value just does param1 plus param2. So how do you call functions? They recall, just like you would down here, the name of your function and then the parentheses. And if there are parameters, you're going to pass the parameters in between the parentheses. So no return returns just nothing because it has no return, no parameters. Test return is the function no params, which again, no params, if you remember, returned a value. So we store the value, test return equals the return value of no params. And then we print that out. And then finally, we test out something using all 3. So test return, again, same variable, equals the function all return, which again, all return had 2 parameters and 1 return value. So we print out 1, 2, and add them together and return the results, and print the results out. So that's how you do functions. Again, in JavaScript, there are a lot more to this. That's what we're going to cover in this class mostly. And once again, run your code. You can do it the way you do it normally, which is going to be, finding the folder, going to the HTML file. I'm going to do mine a bit differently because I'm using a different OS, but don't worry about it too much. Oh, my bad. So here's the exact same web page we saw earlier. Oh, mine's a bit laggy. Is it lagging for your end too? Or is it my computer being slow? I'm going to reshare my screen. I think my Firefox has crashed or something. Okay, I think we're good now. Very interesting. Computers, man. Wild. All right, so here is the demo 2 page here. As you can see, is just, got some JavaScript going on. Open up our console. Let me pull up my chat again, sorry. I can see your questions if they come up. Again, F12 or left click and can inspect if you want to do it that way instead. And as you can see, this function has no return of parameters, like we thought it would. This function has a return value and the number 3, because 1 plus 2 equals 3. So that is how you do functions in JavaScript. You will obviously do a lot more with them. We only covered the absolute basics today. So again, here's a demo 2, has all that code you might need. Let's close them out here. All right, let's present again. All right, before we go too much forward, are there any questions? All right then, in which case it is time for checkpoint number 1. I've been talking for quite a while now, about 30 minutes or so, a little bit longer than that actually. It is time for you guys to properly try writing your own JavaScript code. So checkpoint number 1 is to try to write the FizzBuzz program in whatever text editor you like. So if you know what FizzBuzz is, great, jump into it. If you don't know what FizzBuzz is, no concerns. FizzBuzz, and here I have it here on slide 20, write a function that prints the numbers from 1 to 100. So let's start thinking about how can I do that? And try to do it with a loop, not like constant out loud. But for multiples of 3, print the word fizz instead of the number, and for multiples of 5, print buzz instead of the number. For numbers that are a multiple of both 3 and 5, print fizz buzz. So this is a very common programming question, and I think that everyone here should have the knowledge to think about how they can write this program. We went through everything you might need in the first 20 slides here. So with that in mind, let me stop my screen share and let's hop into breakout room time. All right, everyone's back. Very nice. That was checkpoint 1. I hope it gave you a good overview of JavaScript, the basic JavaScript syntax you might use in your code. It is now time to jump into a little bit more JavaScript. All right, so we're going to cover 2 more things, then we'll jump into another breakout session because these are kind of the more advanced, not advanced, but the more commonly used aspects of JavaScript. The first one is going to be JavaScript Arrays. So JavaScript arrays are very similar to arrays in basically every other programming language, with the exception of kind of like Python. I'm going to kind of say Python and see what JavaScript kind of is. JavaScript arrays can hold any type and any quantity of data. So to read this slide, they're defined with square brackets. So you can see open square bracket, close square bracket with some data, comma, data, comma, data. And this continues on for as much data as you want or need. And like Python lists, they're called lists in Python, but arrays in JavaScript, they can hold any type or quantity of data. So you can see on my example, I'm holding my array here, has the numbers 1, 2, -5, 0.56, and the boolean true. Like I said, doesn't matter, whatever you're filling up to that day. Arrays are also zero indexed. Very common, you'll probably already know this, meaning the first element is indexed 0. What does this mean? As you can see here, this 1 is the first element of this array, but to the computer it is indexed 0. Similarly, this 2 is in element number 2, but it is indexed to 1. And then the same thing here, this true is technically the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5th element, but it is the 4th index. So the index, the number of element minus 1 is the index, or 0 indexed, as it's also called. All right, demo program 3. So like I said, we're gonna have a lot of demos this time around. Don't worry about it. I think it's a good, kind of give you guys a good overview of everything we're gonna go over. Demo 3 is actually, the folder of demo is called demo 3-4 because the demo 3 and demo 4 kind of go together. And so we're going to go over demo 3 first. We'll briefly go over demo 4. So I've commented out demo 4. We'll uncomment it afterwards. But here's demo 3. We have an array, so let array equal the array 1 for true test negative 4.5. Print the array, so we print out the entire array. And then the array length. To get the array length, we can do the name of your array. Mine's called array. Yours can be called whatever you feel like calling it, array.length. And that'll print out the length of your array. And then print a index of your array. That's just going to be simple. It's just console.log, and the array bracket the number, the index number, then the close bracket. Can anyone take a guess and tell me, line 11, what will line 11 print out? What is the third index of my array here? Test. Thank you, Muhammad. What about line 12? What is the 0th index of my array? Someone else. What do you think it's going to be? 1. Thank you, Christian. Exactly. You can hang of it. Although the test string here is the 4th element, it is the 3rd index. Very common mistake in programming is to forget that and choose the wrong index for your array, which may give you wrong answers or even an error if you go outside the bounds of your array. So let's quickly pull up my program here. So again, you don't have to do it this way. I have Linux, so I'm using it this way, but that's just me. My computer is very slow today. All right, as you guys can see, this the regular old that. We pop open a console tab here. All right, so here as you can see, we've printed out the array. The array consists of 1 for true, test, and negative 4. Which is so a cool thing about your browser console, and especially the print command, is unlike other programming languages, if you print out like a whole, like very complicated data structure like an array, you could actually hit the little drop-down arrow next to it and view like the more internal components of the array. So for example, it'll open it up here. It shows me the elements, the 0 index, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4. It'll also show me the length of the array. So I can actually get that from the little console tab as well. Pretty cool, neat feature. Definitely very useful. But you may not always want that to happen. So as you can see, we print out the length, which is 5, like we thought it would be. And then array at element 3, which is test. And array at element 1, or 0, which is 1. Very nice. Okay, that was that. Let's jump back in. So again, arrays, not too difficult. Kind of like a variable, but longer, if you want to kind of think of it that way. So I hope that was a good overview. Again, very similar to C arrays or Java arrays or kind of that kind of style, even Python to an extent. So yeah. Now go to the fun part. This is probably one of my favorite parts of JavaScript and is one of the most powerful parts of JavaScript. JavaScript Objects. So this is a bit of background for you. One of the most popular data transfer formats on the web is JSON. So the way that computers can transfer data between hosts like your computer and a server somewhere far away, like Google, for example, is JSON, or JavaScript Object Notation. We will use this quite often later on, so definitely pay attention. You will definitely use this information. JavaScript objects are like fancy arrays, which is not inaccurate, meaning they can hold data, but a little bit different, and you'll see why in a second. So JavaScript objects use a key-value pair. You use the key to reference the stored data, and the value can be any data type. You can even use another array or another object as a data type. And you'll see an example of it in our demo program here. But definitely pay attention. Demo 4 is going to be extremely important for the final project and for lesson 5 and 4 even too, to an extent. Open up demo 4 here. I'm going to uncomment the demo 4 program from the code here. here is the demo for .js. So here's a JavaScript object. Let the object name, so in this case, I call mine object. You can call yours whatever you may want. Open, close, little square parentheses, my bad. And then you have the key value. So you can see the key, colon, space is optional. I put it, you don't have to put it, value, key, colon, value, key, colon, value. So what are we doing here? As you guys can see, it is creates a basic JavaScript object, school, key. The value is Purdue. That should say Zoom. Not my bad. That's from last semester. Whoops. The location is Zoom. The participants, that's the key, is 50. Is online is true. If you now what we do is you print the whole thing to the screen, you'll see again like the arrays, it'll kind of unfold into nice components for us to see easily from the console tab. But we can also print stuff out from it using like a regular old array access. So object at the index, but not a number this time. We give it a property name in quotes, so school, which will put Purdue. Then what we'll do is we can also grab the same value using dot notation. So object dot school compared to object bracket school, as you guys saw earlier. So when do you use either one? Up to you, completely up to you. I will oftentimes in my code use dot notation only because it's very common in many formats when you work with advanced without APIs, which we'll cover again lesson 5. But if you prefer the bracket notation of, for example, an array, also works fine, no problems there. The one interesting fun fact of an array here is if you don't want to give it like a string like the word school, you can give it a variable that has the value of the key you want to search for. So it's a little bit more advanced in that regards. But again, otherwise these two, the array notation versus the dot notation, works almost the exact same. Then how you change the value of a key object, a key value pair? Well, you say the name of your object dot the key, or again, bracket the key name up to your personal standards, and then I go to a variable equal the new value. So I'm changing location from Zoom to online. We print that out. So if we actually just reopen this page, and we look at our, I don't pop that open here. So as you guys can see, here's the bottom part. The object, when you did the console.log object, kind of gives a really nice printout of the object. So we got like, again, the key here, we expanded it down, we got the key, value, key, value, key, value, key, value, and then some more fun stuff down there. But notice this. You can't see it too well here, so I'm going to actually I'm going to comment this line out, whoop, that's not the right line. I'm going to comment this now just for a second so we can see it actually change. And refresh this page. Look, do you see how location is Zoom here? But when I change it from Zoom to, I uncomment the online, we'll save that. Watch what happens really closely. It changes even in the console.log, it changes that location to online. So this little like printout here will actually always be a up-to-date copy of what you're actually storing in that object or that array. So if you ever need to always kind of keep track of it as you go through some changes, printing the entire object, it'll always keep track of your changes. So that was the wrong button there. So as you can see, that's how you do a JavaScript object. And then on demo 3 is how you do a JavaScript arrays. Are there any immediate questions about either one that you guys maybe had? I am not seeing any, which is perfectly fine. With that in mind, I think it's now time to jump into checkpoint number 2. So checkpoint number 2 is to create a dealership of sorts in quotes here using arrays and objects. So what do I mean by dealership? So kind of like you would in a car dealership, you can try to make, I would recommend, like an array of objects where each object is a car. And your car can have properties like price, model, manufacturer, color, date, features, whatever you want. And then try to print out the entire dealership to this screen. It doesn't have to be pretty or work very well. Just try to practice writing arrays and objects. All right, so here's part 2, responsiveness. Technically, it's a continuation of part 1, JavaScript, but it's a subsection within JavaScript. So we can actually modify HTML and CSS from JavaScript using the document word we discussed earlier. We've kind of like, I mentioned it, but didn't ever discuss it. This is why. But we won't spend too much time on this section. I don't want to spend too much time on this section because VueJS will do, and most other JavaScript libraries will do a lot of this work we're going to go over for us. And so we won't ever have to do it manually ourselves, but we should know what these kind of frameworks or libraries are doing on their back end. So we'll briefly go over it. But don't worry about it too much. You won't spend much time, if any, ever doing this kind of manual changing. So remember those class and ID fields from last week? Well, they're coming back here again. So as a reminder, ID refers to a single HTML tag in a single web page, whereas class can refer to a group of multiple HTML tags or different HTML tags in a web page. If you're still unsure on the distinction, you can watch back on lecture 1. There's a much better breakdown of it there. Or you can ask a mentor in the last little help session we got going on. So we can actually use class and IDs to reference an element or a group of elements in JavaScript. And you will have to for the kind of checkpoint we got coming up here. So this method, I'm going to give you a list of methods here. Don't worry about them too much. Just know that these are the basic 4 methods or 4 kind of things you're going to use to modify and change HTML and CSS. So the first one, document.getElement by ID, then getElement by class name. As you might suggest, you put inside the parentheses a string of the ID name or the class name, and it will return the element or the list of elements for which match that ID or class name. The last 2, element.innerHTML, given an element returned by the function one here or there. .innerHTML allows you to view, modify, change, delete, whatever you may want to do, the HTML in between the tags of the element that has that element stored in the variable element. Similarly, element.style allows you to add, change, remove, what have you, CSS properties to that HTML element. Like I said, we won't spend too much time on this, but you should know it exists in case you do need to do something like this yourself. So the last thing we'll cover is event handlers. Adding an on-click to an HTML button. So if you remember from last week, we had buttons, but they were kind of useless. They didn't really do anything. And here's how you make them do something. You can add what's called a click handler or an on-click to an HTML handler, and what it will do is it'll run some JavaScript function whose name you provide and the little quotes here around on-click whenever that button is clicked. So this little example here of text is some button, and the HTML property on-click equal quote quote like you would any other HTML property. And inside of the quotes, I put the name of a JavaScript function, in this case, some function. And it'll actually run some function whenever I press the button. So that is time for demo program number 5, which we got coming up right here. So quickly, let's look at demo program 5 HTML really quick. It's a bit different. I've actually changed the heading. I have 2 classes now. They have the H1, H2 tags have the class heading, and the P tag here has the ID please change. I've also added a button with the on-click of change page, which we'll see in the JavaScript file, And so remember, classes, there can be multiple class tags in multiple elements with the same class name in an HTML page, but only a single element with a unique ID in each HTML page. So we'll open up our script. Bloop. And you can see here my function change page. What it does is, whenever you press the button, it'll run the script, it'll run this function, which again, p tag is the name of my element, equals document.getElement by ID, please change. So remember, the p tag had the ID please change. So I'm saying find the element on my page with the please change ID name and return it to me. I then say p tag dot inner HTML equals this page was changed. So you can see before it said this page will not change. Well, suddenly it has changed. Next, some CSS styling. Document.getElements by class name, heading. So remember the h1 and the h2 tag both had the heading, and here we have got the heading tag and saved it to an array called htags. It's important to note that getElements by class name will return an array. So you will have to say like the name of your elements at htags at some index, even if there's only one element in your HTML page that has that class name. By default, it will return an array. So I have htags at I, a basic for loop here. I from 0 to the length of my array. Htags at I, so for every h element with the class name heading, change the style, change the color to blue. Before this plain old black, I believe it was. Nope, sorry, they were red before. And you'll see this kind of come up on screen. So we'll pull it up here, Firefox. So look, we got the red heading and then the text here with the, will not change. Now if we click the button, watch what happens. Whoop, it changes the color to blue and it changes the inner HTML of the p tag. So your button can do a lot. We only have here some basic stuff, but obviously in a more advanced website, you can do stuff like saving a file, maybe loading a file, making a database request, whatever you may want to with that button click. Are there any questions about event handlers or even responsiveness in general? All right, I'm not seeing any. That's all right. Other JavaScript resources. So like last time, we only have covered the basics, but there are a lot of things in JavaScript. So WT Schools has a great tutorial on it if you want to go through there. We will cover a few more advanced JavaScript things these next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks. But if you want to kind of get ahead of the curve there, you can access this website or any other tutorial and learn more on your own time. So before we jump into our checkpoint number 3, I'll come back to that slide. Thank you everyone for coming. Here's a feedback form. If you were all willing to please fill it out, that really would be great for us. A lot of you filled it out last week. I hope you all to fill it out this week as well. It helps us improve our lesson plan, our lessons in general, if you give us the good and the bad feedback. And as a reminder, open review hours on Thursdays, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on Zoom. Link will be posted in the Slack channels ahead of time. And you can ask us on Slack or on your breakout rooms any questions about the last couple of slides here. So your checkpoint for this time is to modify the FizzBuzz program you wrote in checkpoint number 1. This time, instead of adding the numbers and the words fizz and buzz to the console, try making it write the numbers to the web page. So it's going to be a little bit challenging, but I think everyone here can definitely do it. And if you want a little bit of an extra challenge, not too much of an extra challenge though, try to make the color, the style of the fizz and the buzz different. We change their background, change their font size, change their color, whatever you feel like doing. This will be the final checkpoint for today. And if you have any questions, I recommend you continue, want to practice, I recommend you continue working on checkpoint number 3 for your rest of the week here. That'll be your quote unquote, I won't call it homework, but your practice requirement for the week, just so you can hang of just doing some advanced JavaScript stuff.